Hey guys, it's Matt here, and in this video, we're going to be going over the iPad 8, but more specifically, using iPadOS 18 on 32 gigabytes of storage. For context, this is the iPad 8th generation. This is an iPad with an A12 processor, and it's actually decently fast. However, the iPad 8 has something very special going for it, and that is, it is the last Apple device to have 32 gigabytes of space. Now, the iPad 7th generation is also still supported with the A10 chip, and there is a 32 gigabyte version of that as well, but the 8th gen is likely going to be seeing iPadOS 19, since the 7th gen I'm sure is 18 is probably the end of the line. If it's not, I'd be surprised. But this iPad will likely be getting iPadOS 19, if not maybe iPadOS 20. Now, on the iPhone side of things, you actually cannot get a supported iPhone right now that only has 32 gigabytes of space. So for context, the iPhone 10 here has 64 gigabytes of space, double of what this iPad does, and this lost support 2 years ago. This is stuck on iOS 16. The oldest currently supported iPhone is the iPhone XS and XR, which also both shipped with 16 gigabytes. The last iPhone to have 32 gigabytes is the iPhone 7, and this lost support 3 years ago because it does not support iOS 16, and funnily enough has the same processor as the iPad 7, which does get the latest version, but you know, this device likely will be getting another version of iPadOS, and ultimately, I don't know how well it's going to be able to run that, because if we go back into some previous history with how iOS has been in terms of storage size, iOS 12, which is the last version that's on the iPhone 6 and 5S, uses roughly about 6 gigabytes of space in total for its system, a little bit under that, I think. So you have roughly 10 gigabytes to play with on a 16 gig phone, and you have roughly 25, 26 gigabytes on a 32 gigabyte device, which is a major improvement over what this has, but I'll get to that in a moment. iPadOS and iOS 15, which were the last versions for the iPhone 6S and for the Air 2 and Mini 4 and the 7, unfortunately, used roughly about 9 gigabytes of space, 8 or 9-ish for its system. This left 16 gigabyte devices with around 7 or 8 gigabytes to play with, and it left 32 gigabyte devices like my iPhone 7 around 23, 24 gigabytes. So if we fast forward to this device here, if we go into storage, now I have all of the same apps that I have my iPad, this one here, as I do on my M4 iPad Air, which has 128 gigabytes of space. So this guy has 32, and I only have 14 gigabytes free. That doesn't seem terrible, but the system is actually using most of this. You can see this section here. I had 18 gigabytes free on a clean install of iPadOS 18. Yikes. So iPadOS has essentially doubled in space over the past couple of years, and yeah, it's not great. My dad actually was using this. I had bought this for school a few years back. My dad bought it for me when I got an iPad 10. Well, fast forward to today, I got this back. He bought my iPad 10 as I got my M4 iPad Air, and I got this back, and he was complaining that this thing, while it's fast and it's fine, he couldn't install software updates because even though he barely had any apps installed, there was not enough storage space left to update the iPad. Like, there just wasn't space. So this actually turned out to be a real problem for someone who barely uses his iPad for really anything. He uses it to watch videos and to text people and do stuff like that, but it's nothing super extreme. Like, he's not running virtual machines or something like that like I would be on my iPad. It just wasn't a good experience, and it actually concerned me as I tried to use this because there's barely any space left. Now, back in the day of when this iPad was pretty brand new, when I first got it a few years ago, this was not a problem because this device was running iPadOS 15 as its operating system, and 15 ran on devices with half the storage, so they had to compromise a bit and make sure that it would fit on those even smaller devices. However, now that iPadOS 18 runs on 32 gigabyte devices, most devices don't even have that little space. I'm pretty sure it's only the iPad 7 and 8 that are currently supported. All brand new iPads at least start with 64 gigabytes of storage, and the higher up ones like the M2 iPad Air and the M4 iPad Pro come with 128 gigabytes, if not more than that, for the Pros. I don't remember how much those come with. So with that being the case, the fact that there are no iPhones that are currently supported right now with 32 gigabytes of space, and the fact that there are only a couple iPads that are supported, Apple's been kind of forgetting about these models and have been leaving these with like no space. This actually happened with another device. This is kind of a more extreme case, but the Series 3 Apple Watch, it's not really focusing, but this device only had 8 gigabytes of space, and it actually became such a problem that in the later stages of watchOS 8, in order to update the device, it said you'd need to factory reset it because the system used so much storage that there seriously just wasn't even room for the system. Back when 8 gigabytes was the standard on the Apple Watch, such as my Series 0 Apple Watch right here, this has 8 gigs of space. When watchOS 4 came out, watchOS 4 is the last version for the Series 0, it barely used any space because all Apple Watches up to that point, with the exception of the cellular Series 3, had 8 gigabytes of space. They've upped that since then because they realized that's not enough. It's these devices that have super little space that are newer, and like, for instance, this being the newest device that had 8 gigs, it's leaving these devices in a bad state. Now, this device is not unusable like this. Honestly, I can use this day to day if I really wanted to. However, me using all of these apps like this will fill up the cache that's used. YouTube, for instance, is a bad one. It'll use around like 1 or 2 gigabytes of space. This iPad has to keep clearing it because it keeps running low on space. Well, this iPad is fine, it's fast. So while, for instance, I opened camera here and it opened pretty much immediately because this still has the A12 chip, it's still a decently fast device. The issue is the storage. I don't think that this is going to bode well. Now, this iPad is running iPadOS 18.0. That is the latest version as of recording this video, so it's very possible that they'll be pushing out more updates over time to maybe fix some of this, to shrink down the system partition. So it's very possible that the system will actually continue to get updates and might be able to slim down that partition a little bit. And this isn't just going to benefit this device if Apple does something like that. It will actually benefit all devices because then the user will get more space to tinker around with. Even this iPhone 12 Pro Max right here that has 256 gigs of space will still benefit from having an extra gigabyte or two for people who are like low on space. So it will be useful, but I don't know if Apple's going to take a route like that, and that's what I'm concerned about. So it does make me curious what the end of the road will look like for this iPad. This thing's still got a couple years left in my opinion. I think the iPad 7 is going to go, and then the iPad 8 will likely be the last 32 gigabyte iPad supported for a little while. And I think that this is actually part of the reason why the system partitions are smaller. Apple can't really get away with making the overall system partition that much bigger because they have to realize that there are devices that are this small. In fact, that's actually what happened with iPadOS and iOS 15. The betas were actually so unusable on the iPhone 6s with 16 gigs. There was 1 gigabyte free after the system was done with it. Like there was no space, so they had to shrink down the partition. And I'm sure that that probably did happen for the beta cycle of this as well, but I feel like we just need a little bit more space for these devices to be usable. Otherwise, I think we're gonna run into some problems. So this iPad here, honestly, I think it's fine the way that it is with 32 gigs, but I feel like any increase in size could be a major problem. We already saw some issues with it with the iPad 6 running iPadOS 17, the iPad 5 running 16. Unfortunately, both my iPad 6 and my iPad 5 both actually have 128 gigabytes, so that wouldn't really be fair to test here. iPadOS handles itself way differently on devices with less storage. So, for instance, like for this device, it's been clearing the cache of YouTube. For instance, let me see if I can go back. You can see that this is only using 300 megabytes. iPadOS is cleaning the system out a lot more because it needs to in order to actually fit everything. So, my hope is that while this device is still usable the way that I have set it up, for most people who have all of the settings and stuff default turned on, like iCloud Photos, which is auto on, with, what does it say, iCloud Health, iCloud, all that stuff where it downloads data to your device, like some low quality images or whatever, or health data, which gets synced over and then you can view it anytime. It can use your space pretty instantaneously. You could sign into iCloud and then it suddenly just fills up your storage space because you have so little on a device like this. I hope that they actually fix this issue because it is going to be a problem if they don't actually do some adjusting to this, or if it continues to get worse, I feel like we're gonna have some issues. But yeah, that's about it for this video. If you liked it, then give it a like, and if you have an iPad 7 or 8 on iPadOS 18 and it has 32 gigabytes of space, let me know how your experience has been. I'm gonna be honest, it's been fine for me, but it's not been good for most other people I've talked to. Thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you all later. Bye-bye.